There is the power of imagination, and it is necessary for spiritual development so that one can envision those levels on which a person does not yet stand in order to ascend to them. This power allows us to instantly overcome a large number of transitional stages that we must go through, just as children imitate their parents and with the help of imagination try to be adults. In spiritual work, one can leap over several levels at once by imitating the righteous whose paths we follow. For a certain time, we can attach ourselves to their states in which they exist, thereby skipping over many intermediate stages that we would otherwise have to pass through. We study the spiritual levels. We begin to imitate, just as, for example, a little girl who takes care of a doll and feels like a mother even though she is not one yet. So the power of imagination allows us to leap over several stages at once that we are supposed to go through in the process of our development. This means overcoming the limitation of the place in which we find ourselves, both physically and spiritually. After all, place in the spiritual sense is desire. With the help of imagination, we can move to a level where the desire is of a higher quality than what we currently have. This is also called teleportation, through which we move to higher levels of perceiving reality. Also, with the help of imagination, we can go back and feel nostalgic, enjoying a past spiritual attainment. Thanks to this tool, we can be either a giver or a receiver. Sometimes I take on the role of a student, sometimes that of a teacher. At times I need help or I provide it myself. It turns out that the person tries on various images, forms, and states each time. Imagination paints such examples, and the person enters into similarity with that to which they are attuned. There are different garments that the one who attains puts on with the help of imagination. He can praise the Creator like a musician serving in the temple, a servant in the temple, a high priest, a master of prayer, working with the heart, a sage receiving knowledge. And so, imagination allows him to correct various details in his multifaceted being each time. It is impossible to achieve adhesion to something what you do not know. It is impossible to desire jalabula. Jalabula is something you don't know what it is. That's why it's impossible to want it. Before a person has tried what a banana is, he doesn't know what to want. He was given a taste, now he knows what to want. But how can you want something you have never tried? Have you seen how the mass media works, what is called advertising today? They tell you about things you would never buy, but sometimes they have to show you what it is and explain how interesting and important it is. It's important to truly live in benevolence, to gradually ascend the steps, to attain, to deeply feel the Creator, to draw light for others. They are advertising to you, and your task is to truly want it. To buy what they are advertising, how do people buy? They make an effort, and that's how they buy. They want it, they make an effort, they imagine themselves there, they do what was suggested. And so gradually, as efforts are made below, an awakening begins above, and you start to get a response. And what you thought, what it is, how it looks from your point of view, from your perception. When the Creator responds to you, you understand what truth is and what it means that you thought, because sometimes you think one thing, but the Creator gives you something else. And when He gives it to you, and you are truly waiting for an answer from Him, you realize that this is exactly how it was meant to be. And until you receive an answer, you do what you think is right. Everything that depends on you, all your efforts. The imagination is a very powerful tool. The more developed it is in someone, the greater the chance to progress spiritually. Because if a person cannot imagine spiritual levels, higher states, if they lack the power of imitation, difficult to move forward. That's why you need to be able to envision higher levels, lofty dreams, and great goals. As Baal HaSulam says, if you want to jump onto the table, you need to aim above the table. Of course, imagination also has a negative side when it can present you with a distorted perception. But Baal HaSulam says there is no other way. We need to imagine ourselves, like a little girl playing with a doll, pretending to be a mother. Has the girl really become a mother? No. But the very act of doing this helps her develop. Later, when she reaches the real stage of motherhood, she will see that the mother plays with a real child, not a rag doll. But at that moment, it is a crucial stage of development to imagine yourself at those levels. There are different periods, a time for preparing the vessels, a time for receiving the light, then a new stage of preparation, and again, there will be concealment. But the more experienced the person becomes, the more easily they perceive these concealments as an inevitable part of the spiritual path. That's why Rabash says, a righteous person always sees a descent as the beginning of a new ascent. There is nothing negative about it. Everything is the beginning of a new ascent. Yes, it is accompanied by concealment, by effort, by the withdrawal of light from above. And there are those who already understand the essence of the Creator's interaction with the one who attains. They enter into deficiency more quickly and earlier, even before the Creator takes away. This is help from above. Because when a person cannot move to the next level, something is taken away from him so that he will move forward. Otherwise, he won't budge. The Creator says, just as I rejoice in giving to you, so do I rejoice in taking from you. If we look at it this way, from a positive perspective, it is a blessing that he takes away. Baal HaSulam gives a parable. A person begs for alms with a little cup, but the cup is already full, and we would like to give more. But it is small, like a thimble, we could give more, but the vessel is small, so we will knock it out and give more in portions. We knock it out and give knowing that he will receive all at once. That's why nothing is done for nothing. Nothing is wasted. Everything accumulates. Everything is recorded in a spiritual pension fund, and it will return to you. Nothing is lost for no reason. Everything is preserved. All efforts are collected in a spiritual account. And when the time comes, all attainments will be given to a person in full. That's why you should care not about the light, but about the vessels. But it's hard for us when there is no light. Imagination is an important tool. It allows us to move forward. But it can also move us backward if not directed properly. If a person doesn't move forward, he starts to feel nostalgic for the past. Past's gone. There is only the memory of it. And he takes those memories from there and vividly imagines in his mind as if he is really there. At that moment, light is drawn to him. That's why people love to be in a state of nostalgia, to remember the past, even to talk about it, because light is drawn to that. But if a retiree is telling his friends about this in the park, perhaps, and one old man says to another, you know, when I was 25, I could do 25 pull-ups with a flip on the horizontal bar. Everyone says, wow, that's amazing, you were really cool. He enjoys these memories. But if someone asks him, dear grandpa, can you go now and do 25 pull-ups on the bar? He'll answer, no, I can't. In other words, he can't actually do it anymore. On one hand, these memories accumulate. On the other hand, they can hold a person back if he only keeps reminiscing about the past. Someone who is young in spirit is always stirred by a new sense of lack and moves forward. That's why Rabbi Nachman of Breslov says, in the spiritual, you cannot be old. You can't. You need to constantly renew yourself. A new connection with the Creator. You can't get stuck in the past. There is another force. The mind, thought, reason. The power of thought allows us to overcome time. That's why we study books. It gives us a way out beyond imagination, which is tied to the past. When a person wants to go beyond their usual perception, they need to look at the entire structure of their soul in a global way. And to see how all its parts are actually a single unified soul, simply dressed in different garments of perception. The mind is also a tool capable of seeing everything as one. It can learn from the past, the present, and the future. It is able to absorb all the experience accumulated in reality before it, including all states. And in this way, it goes beyond the limitations of space and time. It can create a sense of lack for the next level. But imagination clings only to what has already been perceived or is already known. So these two forces operate within us. We must learn to master both of them. Now let's look at this using the example of the structure of the Merkaba, the spiritual chariot. The carriage is the outer part of the chariot, similar to the human body. It is pulled by 3 horses, desire, feeling, and imagination. All these forces are controlled by the coachman, that is, the mind. Inside sits the soul, or faith, as mentioned earlier, which is the true master of all the soul's forces. From the outside, it is not visible, not sensed, but its presence is felt, even though it is beyond the limits of sensory perception. Now we know who we are, and during contemplation, we must identify ourselves with our true self and go beyond illusory perception. So let's briefly summarize and move on to a new exercise. For developing the right spiritual perception of reality, A human being is an abstract entity, a desire to receive pleasure. It is clothed in four main forces: mind, imagination, feeling, and desire. I believe that I exist. This is where my world begins. And this I, the believer, is clothed in the mind. Then the I, the thinker, ponders, why am I here and for what purpose? Then thought is clothed in imagination, where images are formed, plans for realization are made, and the spiritual reality is visualized, gradually developing into the I, the one who imagines. Imagination moves in two directions: when we materialize the world downward, and when we elevate desires into the world of thoughts upward. There in that place they are thoughtfully contemplated, and important decisions are carefully made. Imagination then returns upward. Each time we experience a new state of I and do not notice it. And since we act unconsciously, we do not attach any importance to it. These transitions happen constantly from top to bottom, from bottom to top. We are always moving in our perception. Then the I that imagines turns into the I that feels. I feel pleasure from the future realization of the goal. Then the I that feels creates a desire, a deficiency, toward which the I that desires strives. And in the end, this activates the I that acts, my physical body, which brings everything into reality in the material world. At this stage, it is important to become aware of all this from within, which is why simplified language is used. I that believes, I that thinks, I that imagines, I that feels, I that desires, I that acts. These are the inner spiritual levels: Keter, Chokhmah, Binah, Tiferet, Malchut. A spiritual level is a place where the light is revealed. There are 5 of them in total: Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, Chaya, Yechida. We ascend through the levels of Malchut, Zeir Anpin, Yeshut, Abba ve'Ima, Arich Anpin, Atik. These are spiritual levels. We know that a righteous person is the prototype of the Zeir Anpin level. It is taught that a righteous person should be like Zeir Anpin. We study what Zeir Anpin is, how it behaves, what it does. It enters an embryonic state, annuls itself. It can be in a small state, katnat, or in a great state, gadlut. He draws the light, spreads it to others. He raises man, ascends to the higher ones, builds connection in the middle line. He brings the light down to Malchut, connecting the higher and the lower. We learn a lot about Zeir Anpin and about Malchut, how the mind of Zeir Anpin works, how the heart of Malchut works. Every concept that we study in Kabbalah, we must imagine ourselves within these levels and put them into practice. Otherwise, everything will remain theory, philosophy without any inner connection, having no relation to us.